So, start again. Last week I've discussed with you vectors and scalars, the difference between scalar quantity and vector quantity. So, ulitin tayo lang. Nakunan tayo nga scalar. That is any positive or negative physical quantity that can be completely specified by its magnitude. So, ang scalar, magnitude lang siya. But ang vector, magnitude at the same time, meron siyang direction. Perfect example for a vector is a force. This was discussed last week. So, there are types and characteristics of force systems. We have coplanar forces. So, pag sinabi natin coplanar forces, yung lines of action ng forces, they lie on the same plane. So, for example, itong box na to, for example, yung box na yan, sa plane na to, nandito lahat yung mga forces. So, for example, no tao kumaan niya, no amin tayo, nagtakder dito yung plane, we are called coplanar forces. Yung namang non-coplanar forces, line of action of all forces do not lie on the same plane. So, if this is a box, may force dito sa top, may force dito sa side na to, may force dito sa front, may force doon sa bottom. So, those are non-coplanar forces. Collinear forces, line of action of all forces lie on the same straight line. And concurrent forces, ito yung mga forces wherein they meet at the same point. So, as you can see there in the diagram, force F1, F2, F3, and F4, they lie on, magkakaiba sila ng direction, pero iisa lang yung kanilang point of intersection. That is concurrent. For parallel forces, lines of action of all forces are parallel to each other, as you can see there in the diagram. So, dito sa engineering mechanics, most of the time we'll be encountering concurrent forces and parallel forces. Types of forces according to their nature or effect. We have compressive force and tensile force. Pag sinabi kasi natin compressive force, yung force mo, you are trying to push something. Kapag naman tensile force, you are trying to pull. So that is the difference between compressive and tensile forces. So, types of forces according to their means of application. We have concentrated force and distributed force. Perfect example is the concentrated force. For example, say this is a plank of wood. Nung nagtakdar ka, let's say si kada ito, nagtakdar ka dito, you are a perfect example of concentrated force. Bakit? Kasi yung weight mo, nakakoncentrate siya dito sa may mismong point na to. Kung saan ka nakatayo, doon nakakoncentrate yung weight. As for distributed force, let's say this is a slab, let's say the flooring mo. Let's say second floor, the flooring mo niya. Distributed force DJ kasi weight na dito yung flooring. Haan nga nakakoncentrate ije may nga point, but equally distributed iso na ije length iti flooring. So that is the difference between concentrated force and distributed force. So resolution of a force. The resolution of a force is accomplished by means of the parallelogram and triangular laws and the components. So, forces and components, as you can see there in the diagram, I think this was discussed during your physics. So, pag sinabi nating resolution or yung others, we call this your resultant. So, for example, let's consider this a car driven due east for 4 miles, then turn sharply and driven due north for 3 miles. The resultant distance covered is equal to 5 miles. This illustration may be called, yung 4 miles at saka yung 3 miles, we call this the components or yung tinatawag nating parts ng resultant. And masosolve natin itong resultant using Pythagorean theorem. Now, to further understand forces and components, there are two methods or two ways to determine the components of a force. First is using acute angles. Now, as you can see there in the diagram, yung force F natin, meron siyang dalawang component. Kasi di ba naka-incline di ay? Nung naka-incline ti force, dati ka na yung lagi po. Nung naka-incline iti force, at dati duwa nga component na. It's either ni Fx or ni Fy. Nung kunan tayo ng Fx, the force is along the x-axis. Kapag sinabi natin Fy, the force is along the y-axis. So this is our working equation if we want to determine the values of our Fx and Fy. So Fx is equal to F cosine theta x and Fy is equal to F sine theta x. Lukunan tayo nga theta x, that is the angle of inclination of the J force from the x-axis. So as you can see there in the diagram, dito nga theta x, dapat always ti pag-groupyan na dito yung x-axis. Ha, no usarom dito yung equation, dito yung nakabox iti yellow. No usarom dito, dapat i-consider mo iti nga angle, the angle na ti basis mo kat from the x-axis. Haan mo mabalin no usarom dito theta y? Kasi the equation, it is derived from this theta, from that angle. Eh, hanyo nga pagbalbaliktadan basta no kunan tayo nga fx kat usarom dito yung equation, dito nakabox ti yellow. Always i-consider tayo nga angle, the angle of inclination from the x-axis. Okay? So, let's have an example. Tapos mas maawatan tayo, di pa nag-compute iti components, iti force, using acute angles. So, these are your Cartesian planes, x and y-axis. Let's say data the force ko, 100 newtons. And dito 100 newtons, naka-incline iso na 30 degrees from the x-axis. Kata no isolve ko di data araw nga block na nakita yo, that is the fx, then that is fy. Dita kas ko no naka-incline iti force, automatic adda iti x and y component na. Right? So isolve tayo the value ti fx kan the value ti fy. So usaran tayo dahil sa equation na dito. So for the value of fx, that is equal to F times cosine theta x. My F in this example is 100 newtons. The theta x ko, that is the angle of inclination of the force from the x-axis. So, dito 30 degrees. So, no i-input ko dito yung calculator, 100 multiplied by cosine of 30. 86.6. So, 86.6 newtons. Baka na danang ti agdamag. Anya day ti n nga day ito'y. Again, that is the unit of your force. That is the unit of your force. Okay? So, uray no correct, day ti incable mo ito nga 86.6. No awan ti incable mo nga unit, wrong di answer. So, always take note. Nukunan tayo nga vector quantity, adda iti magnitude na hanyo diplipatan. Nukunan nga magnitude, adda iti unit mo. So, that is the value of your fx. Kasunod yung fy. Again, I'm going to use this equation. F sine theta x. So, my f is 100. Again, the theta x ko is 30 degrees. So, inputting this in your calculator, that is 100 times sine of 30. And that's equal to 50 newtons. Okay tayo dito sa medyo naagets tayo niya. Dito panag-ala iti components, iti force using acute angle. Kas kunak no napardasak nga pirmi paki-type iti chat box. At no amok ti medyo nakunay nga paspas. Okay tayo dito sa may component of a force using acute angles. Okay. Another way to solve for the component of a force is using the slope triangle. There are instances kasi no naka-incline di force, haan nga given di angle of inclination. So for example, dito yung iti force F. Di ba, awan nga di angle dito iti given dito yung makikita yung small na triangle. Now using slope triangle, we can determine the values of our fx and fy. We just have to follow this equation. So for example ulit, dito the x and y axis tayo. Let's say that is my force with a magnitude of 110 newtons. So while awan iti given nga angle of inclination, but rather the slope iti given. So no, the J4, that is the run of the slope triangle or Gx. G3, that is the rise of the slope triangle or Gy. H, that is the hypotenuse of the slope triangle. Diba from your trigonometry, diba right triangle dito niya? Right triangle dito. So to solve for the hypotenuse, dito the hypotenuse ni. So to solve for that, using Pythagorean theorem, this is our equation, tapos masolve tayo ni H. So dito yung example, anya garot yung value na ni H ko. That is simply equal to x squared. Again, anya ti x tayo, the 4. Gy ko is 3. Then you have to take the square root of that. So the hypotenuse ko equal to 5. So nung naala kong gh, mambalin ko nga ma-solve the fx kan gfy. So resolve ko gfx kan gfy. Since I'm going to use the slope triangle. Kasi po tayo dyan ko stack j. Diba equation tayo to fx? Fx is equal to x over hf, where in this case, my x or the run of the slope triangle is 4. And my hypotenuse is 5. I-multiply yun lang iso na dyan ti magnitude to force. So entering this in your calculator, that is equal to 4 divided by 5 multiplied by 110. That is equal to 88. So Gfx ko is equal to 88 newtons. Again, do not forget to include the unit. So next, kasanod tayo i-solve Gfy. Again, direct substitution tayo dito sa may equation natin. Fy is equal to y over h times f. In this case, my y or G rise, the na triangle ko is 3. I have to divide that by the value of my hypotenuse 5. Then multiply that by f or 110. And my answer here is 66 newtons. So those are the different ways on how to compute for the component of a force. Again, by using acute angles and by using slope triangle. Now, dito sa may pag-solve ng ating components or regarding forces, we have to take note of sign conventions. Kasi hindi lahat ng forces positive. Hindi lahat ng forces negative. So, paano natin malalaman kung yung force ba ay positive or negative? So, kapag nagpapada tayo the answer, we're going to use these sign conventions. Kapag yung force upward, that is a positive. Kapag yung force downward, negative. Kapag yung force it is pointing to the left, negative. Kapag it is pointing to the right, positive. Okay? Up, positive. Down, negative. Left, negative. Right, positive. Okay? Do not forget these sign conventions. Pag nagkamali tayo ng sign conventions, magkakamali tayo sa ating mga computations. Okay? Let's have this illustration. So, for this problem, you are required to determine the x and y components of each of the forces shown in the figure. So, as you can see there in the figure, dito sa figure na to, there are three forces. We have F, P, and T. So, ni F tayo, 390 pounds, ni P, 300 pounds, and T is 400 pounds. Now, isa-isahin natin yung mga components ng forces na ito. Okay? So, isa-isahin natin siya. Let's start with force P. Ito force P at dati 300 pounds. And the force P, it is pointing to the right downwards. Tama. To the right, downwards, TJP. So, since iti given gamin, no dati P, itikit kitaon tayo. Ti given jay angle of inclination. And take note, yung angle of inclination na, it is from the x-axis. Okay? It is from the x-axis. So, ang gagamitin nating equation para makuha natin yung fx at saka fy ay yung gagamitin natin yung acute angle. Wherein px is equal to p cosine theta x and py is equal to p sine theta x. Let's start with px. So, px, the value of my p is 300. You just have to multiply that by 30 degrees. Now, ang sagot ko dito, positive. Bakit positive? Di ba, no px gamin ngay kat ay no g-force kat along the x-axis, either right or left lang mo pagpilian tayo. Now, if you try to look at this force P, it is pointing to the right downwards, to the right. So, since to the right the direction the x component na, positive DJ force ko, GPX. Right? So, i-enter ko dito yung calculator, that is 300 times cosine of 30 degrees. That is equal to 259.81 pounds. Do not forget again, the unit. Baka dati question, apay nga unit ko matkat LB, apay din kabel kat LBS. Okay lang, no LB or LBS. Again, no LB pound. No LBS pounds. What? Let's solve for the value of our PY. PY. The answer here is negative 300 pounds times sine 30 degrees. Bakit negative? Again, balik tayo dito sa may diagram. The force P is pointing to the right downwards. The y component tayo or JPY, it is pointing downwards, kaya naging negative siya. Okay? So, i-kabel ko ulit the calculator, negative 300 multiplied by sine of 30 degrees, that is equal to 150. Oh, that should be negative 150 pounds. So, in your quizzes or exams, kapag walang sign yung mga forces, mali. Kapag ang nilagay ninyo kay PY ay positive 150 pounds, that is wrong. That should be negative 150 pounds. Okay? Solve na natin si T. Let's solve for T. Force T. Again, si force T may 400 pounds. And given ulit yung kanyang angle of inclination from the x-axis, which is equal to 40 degrees. So, ang gagamitin ko dito, to solve for Tx and Ty is using acute angles. Okay, these are my working equations. I'll start with Tx. The value of my T is 400 and my theta x is 40 degrees. Now, bakit negative? If you try to look at the force T, it is pointing to the left downwards. To the left. Again, to the left, negative T value tayo. So, if you try to input that in your calculator, negative 400 times cosine of 40 degrees, that is equal to 306.42 pounds. For Ty, this is my answer. Apay nga negative ulit BI. Ulit-ulit at dito gawin force T tayo, it is pointing to the left downwards. Again, downwards, kaya negative. And that is equal to negative 257.12 pounds. Okay? So far, from my computation, it is force P and force T. Any question? Or nagets tayo ba? Okay. Nakalangan niya. Let's try to determine the components of force F. Now, si force F, hindi given yung kanyang angle of inclination from the x-axis, but rather, ang given dito, yung slope triangle. So, to solve for this, again, yung gaya nung pinakita ko sa inyo in the previous slide, to solve for the components of that force F, we're going to use the slope triangle, wherein Fx is equal to x over h multiplied by f. But this time, mausar ko lang dahil yung equation, basta amok yung value ni h. Anya ulit gh nga ibagbaga tayo? Data j, hypotenuse, data small nga triangle. So, how do we solve that one? Ang run natin is 5 and our rise is 12. So, we need to determine the value of our h using this equation. Okay. Substitute lang po natin. 5 squared plus 12 squared. That is equal to 13. So, ang ating hypotenuse ay equal sa 13. So, pwede na natin gamitin yung ating working equation. Fx is equal to x over hf, wherein our x is 5 and our h is 13. Now, bakit ko nilagay na negative yung value? Kasi po, yung ating force F, it is pointing to the left upwards. Okay, left, again, left, negative. That is equal to negative 150 pounds. For Fy, again, Fy is equal to y over hf. My y is 12, that is my rise. My hypotenuse is 13, and my f is equal to 390 pounds. If you input this in your calculator, ang lalabas po na sagot ay 360 pounds. Now, positive yung naging sagot ko. Bakit positive? Kasi po, yung force F ko, it is pointing upwards to the left. Upwards, J, Fy. Determine the components of these two forces, 150 kilonewtons and 200 kilonewtons. So, let's start with itong 150 kilonewtons. Diba, the equation tayo? Niya ulit the equation. No angle t given, we're going to use acute angles wherein fx is equal to f cosine of theta x. Diba? Diba in Balaktatay, this theta x is the angle of inclination from what axis? The x-axis. So, from this equation, you cannot use 55 degrees. Kasi yung 55 degrees, that is from the y-axis. So, before I can use this equation, I have to determine the theta x, which is this angle. And kasano ka ma-solve dating angle? I know that this is 90 degrees. So, 90 minus 55, that is equal to 35. So, with that, I can use now this equation for the value of my fx and fy. These are my answers. And since I've discussed with you the sign conventions, 150 kilonewtons is pointing to the left, so that should be negative. And that is, the Fy na is pointing downwards, so this should be negative as well. Nakuha po ba natin? Let's proceed with these 200 kilonewtons. Again, using slope triangles. Nalaklakad, di pa nag-usar sa slope triangle. Yeah. And so, this is my answer. These are my answers. So, for the value of my fx, that is pointing to the right, so that is positive. 200 kilonewtons, the Fy is pointing downwards, so that this should be negative. Nakuha natin? Anya, 5. Sorry. J slope. So, rin ko ipakita yung solution ko. Dito is square root of 5. Again, this is the hypotenuse. So, no alaak the hypotenuse na that is small triangle, that is simply equal to 1 squared plus 2 squared. The answer, Jacob, is square root of 5 or baka may gumamit ng 2.24, okay lang. Basta the square root of 5, that is the hypotenuse of this small triangle. So that is how you are going to solve for the components of a force. Resultant of a concurrent force systems. Yung discussion natin the previous slide, those are just the components of a one force. But since we are engineering mechanics and kasponaktat tayo, we are encountering concurrent forces wherein nagadunga forces pero they meet at one point. And with that, we need to determine the resultant of all those forces. So, kung tayo gawin na resultant, let's say there are 5 forces. Yung 5 forces, we have to equate that into its equivalent one force. So, yun yung tinatawag nating resultant. Now, for the if we're going to use the algebraic method to determine the resultant, this is our working equation, wherein r is equal to the square root of summation of fx squared plus summation of fy squared. At itong theta x na to, again, that is the angle of inclination ng resultant from the x-axis. And this is our working equation. So to further understand how to use this algebraic method, let's try to solve this problem, illustration number 2, para magamit natin yung equation or mas maintindihan natin ang pag-solve ng resultant. So there are, for this problem, there are 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 forces. We have 30 pounds, 20 pounds, 25 pounds, and 10 pounds. So, di ba, di equation tayo gamin tatay, iji pa ng ala iti resultant. This is our equation. That is equal to summation of fx and summation of fy. So, no, day tagar ti working equation tayo, kahit nagar na sa uwan, kailangan na isolve jay fx kan fy na nagiting of forces. So, I'll solve first the fx and fy. Mas convenient para kanyak nag-agusar na table kaysa DJ sa gaysaot na solve. So, nag-agusar na table, I'll start with the 30 pounds force. And the 30 pounds force, fx2 is equal to f cosine theta x. Now, again, the theta x tayo is the basis is from the x-axis, and it is given in this diagram that the 30 pounds is inclined 60 degrees from the x-axis. So, ito yung aking theta x. So, substitute ko lang isuna dyan ti calculator ko. Direct chok. 30 multiplied by cosine. The theta x ni 30 pounds is 60. That is equal to 15. But the 30 pounds, it is pointing to the left upwards. Again, to the left. So, since fx to the left, the fx po, that is negative 15 pounds. Tama? For my 20 pounds, 20 multiplied by cosine, again, my theta x for 20 pounds is 30 degrees. That is equal to 17.32. Ano ang direction ko? 20 pounds is directed to the right, upwards, to the right, so that is positive 17.32 pounds. The 25 pounds force, that is equal to 25 multiplied by cosine of 45 degrees. That is equal to 17.68 pounds. Since the 25 pound is pointing to the right downwards, to the right, so that is positive 17.68 pounds. That 10 pounds, 10 multiplied by cosine of 45 degrees, that is equal to 7.07 pounds. 7.07 di. Since the 10 pounds is pointing to the left, downwards to the left, so to the left, negative 7.07 pounds. Okay? So let's solve for Fy. I'll start with 30 pounds. So for the 30 pounds, 30 multiplied by sine of 60, that is equal to 25.98, but the 30 pounds is pointing upwards, so that is positive. For the 20 pounds, 20 multiplied by sine of 30 degrees, that is equal to 10, pointing upwards pa rin siya, kaya positive. And for the 25 pounds and 10 pounds, these are my answers. Si 25 pounds, negative siya kasi pababa. Same with the 10 pounds, negative kasi pababa din siya. Okay? So, after na nakuha natin yung ating values ng fx and fy, again, dito sa my equation, I am looking for the value of the resultant r. So, I need to get the summation of fx and fy. If I'm going to add negative 15 plus 17.32 plus 17.68 minus 7.07, that is equal to 12.93 pounds. Ganun din yung gagawin ko dito kay Fy, that is 25.98 plus 10 minus 17.68 minus 7.07, that is equal to 11.22 pounds. So, nakuha ko na yung summation ng aking mga fx and fy. So, pwede ko nang gamitin yung r is equal to the square root of summation of fx squared plus summation of fy squared. Direct substitution tayo lang yan. So, r is equal to the square root of 12.9 12.93 squared plus 11.23 squared. Again, do not forget you have to take the square root of that, and that is equal to 17.13. Or, dito yung 17.08 answer ko dyan kasi consider ko lang J1 decimal point. 12.9 squared plus 11.2 squared. Yeah, 17.08. But during your quizzes and exams, i-indicate mo lang i-dyan, no, hanggang ilang decimal points ang i-consider natin para magpapada tayo to answer. But nevertheless, the process on how you're going to solve for the value of your resultant is this one. Okay, this is the process. Now, kailangan din natin kunin yung theta x or yung direction. So, no problem, tiin baga na find the resultant of the forces and the direction. No kunanda nga direction, it is pertaining to its theta x. Okay? Kinawatan tayo. No problem, at dati mabasa yung determine the direction of the resultant. The word nga direction, it pertains to your theta x. Now, to solve for theta x, this is the equation. Tangent of theta x is equal to summation of fy over summation of fx. So, in this case, binaliktad ko na siya para makuha ko yung theta x. Yung aking summation fy is 11.23. Divide it by fx, 12.93. Since we are looking for the value of theta x, do not forget to get the inverse tangent of your answer. That is equal to 40 degrees, 58 minutes, 30.22 seconds, or simply 40.98 degrees. This is my answer. Okay? Kinawatan tayo. Nukunan tayo nga resultant. DJ mismo nga force, the magnitude of force, that is 70.08 pounds. As per the direction of that resultant, that is equal to theta x, which is equal to 40.97 degrees. Another method we are using to solve for the resultant is using the triangle law, and which states that if vectors representing in magnitude and direction, two concurrent forces are drawn in order, and a triangle is constructed having these vectors as sides, the third side of the triangle, the vector drawn from the beginning of the first vector to the end of the second vector, represents in magnitude and direction the resultant of the two forces. So, dito yung triangle law. Actually, na-mention nyo dito yung physics. Kasi dito triangle law, this is also called the force polygon. Wherein, from that two forces, ag-draw kayo iti parallelogram. Then, from that parallelogram, ag-drawing kayo ulit iti triangle. And to further understand how this triangle law works, let's have this example. The screw I in figure below is subject to two forces, F1 and F2. Determine the magnitude and direction of the resultant force. G-value tayo kan F1 kat 100 newtons. G-value tayo kan F2 kat 150 newtons. Now, using the triangle law, you are required to determine the resultant of these two forces. Again, ulit, tukunan tayo nga resultant. No, let's say that duwa nga forces, alaom dijay equivalent po nga may nga force na. So, the two forces, that is equivalent to one force. Anya dijay nga one force, iso jay resultant. So, isolve tayo using triangle law. And for this one, let's solve for FR. We're going to use the cosine law. Anya ti ko na jay trigonometry nga naalayo dahil cosine law. Malagip yun di cosine law, ti ko na jay c squared is equal to a squared plus b squared equals to ab cosine c. Data di cosine law tayo. Apay nga kunak na agpusar tayo di cosine law. Anya pinagbaling nga basihak, apay nga cosine law ti usarap. So let's connect that tayo, triangle law. The very first thing na aramidin ni from these two forces, agdrawing kayo ti parallelogram. Di ba ti parallelogram kat isla rectangle na nakasikig, nakaslant na sides. And as you can see there in this diagram, ang original force natin dito is the 100 newtons and the 150 newtons. Before I proceed, agdendendad kayo? Ang kayo nga agbuy-buya lang dito screen Ano, buy-buya kayo lang. Okay, so going back to this one, and originally we have the 100 Newton force and the 150 Newton force. So the first nga aramidin nyo from these two forces, ni 150 and ni 100 Newtons. Ag-drawing kayo ti parallelogram. Again, ti parallelogram, kasla iso na nga rectangle nga naka-islang iso na. So, no data, dagiti the original nga forces tayo, ag-drawing tayo ti parallelogram. Diba naadal tayo, nukunan tayo nga parallelogram. Nakita ba? The difference. So, change ko na lang. Para makita the difference the colors. Dito, so originally, we have the 150 newtons and the 100 newtons. Nag-drawing kayo ti parallelogram. No, kas ano ti panak iti no kas ti islant na dahil 100 newtons. Isumot lang diay. Diba kasi nga parallel. The same with this 150 newtons. Parallel garod, diba? O, stop. Isipin nyo na lang, perfect parallelogram yan. So, data di parallelogram tayo. Nagipon nyo dahil ni 150. Dahil di 100. Tapos, no na-drawing tayo di parallelogram, ag-drawing tayo iti line from the point na nagsabatan ni 150 ka ni 100 hanggang ijay bangir na diyan. At that point, the color black na line, that is your FR. So, mayroon na tayong parallelogram.
Ata di ba triangle lo, garo niya triangle lo. So ag-aramid tayo iti triangle. Di ba kung nakatay parallelogram, so no daytoy ket 150, kayat na garod na sa uwan. Daytoy nga side 150 not lang. Tama, parallel garod. So, since kastan, makikita ko na triangle daytoy. Kaya ko naka-triangle, katak daytoy kasi inyalis ko garod jabangid. Triangle daytan, di ba? Uwan ko na yun. O, daytan di triangle. So nga, nagtinag tayo nga triangle lo. Again, daytoy kulay black, daytoy ni FR. So, bukas nagbali lang iso nga triangle, the next thing, kailangan dagitoy angles. Ano dagitoy nga angle? Kasi di ba di trigonometry, um, sides kan angles ti adadalo tayo dyan. Since nag-agsubli ito trigonometry, alaan tayo garod dagit sa angles nga dagitoy. So kasano tayo nga alam dagit yung angles? Another property of a parallelogram is no ti ko na naijay no pag-aadam amin mga angles iti parallelogram that should equal to 360 degrees. That should equal to 360 degrees. And no 360 degrees karod no pagko-combine nak amin di angles iti parallelogram. Tapos iti uh, lomot lang iti parallelogram. No mano daytoy nga angle no mano daytoy isumot lang ijay. No mano daytoy nga angle isumot lang diyay. Tatano kitaan nyo kita diagram. Kas ano nga naala na dagitang angle 65 degrees kan 115 degrees. Agsubli tayo ijay nga original nga problem. Di ba dito yung original nga problem? Ni F2, naka-incline iso na 10 degrees from the y-axis, di ba? Tapos ni 100 newtons, naka-incline iso na 15 degrees from the x-axis. Di ba naadal tayo di lower years tayo? Daytoy angle nga daytoy 90 degrees. Tama. Tatama no daytoy garod nga angle between the two forces. Mano di nga angles. Mano di nga angle. We know that that is 90 degrees minus the 15 degrees minus again the 10 degrees, that is equal to 65 degrees. Iso nga di jay angle nga daytoy that is equal to 65 degrees and kung nakarod parallelogram no manuman di angle ditoy isumot lang di angle ijay iso di 65 degrees. Iso nga daytoy angle nga daytoy that is 65 degrees. This angle is 65 degrees. Okay? And again, from the law, may isa nga properties iti parallelogram. The upat nga angles iti parallelogram should equal to 360 degrees. No 65 degrees, dito nga angle, 65 degrees mo't lang dito nga angle. So, minus 65 ulit. Dito 230 degrees, i-divide tayo DJ by 2. Apay nga by 2? Kasi dapat yung tabat-bati nga duwang angle. That is 230 divided by 2. Iso tinangalaan nga jay 115 degrees. Jay, day 65. Day 65. Tapos dating angle jay 115 degrees. Apay nga 8% ko dito eh. Kasi kung nagarod, di ba tatay, tatlo masolve tayo ni FR, usarak ni cosine law. Anya tinagbalin nga ba sarak ang nga cosine law? Di ba naadal tayo sa trigonometry? If two sides are given, and the birbirukom lang dyan may isang side, pero given the angles, you may use the cosine law or the sine law. But for me, mas convenient para kanya iti cosine law. So in this case, pagbalinok nga iti C, iso ni FR, pagbalinok nga ti A ket iso ni 100. Pagbalinak nga ni B iso ni 150. The cosine of C, daytoy nga angle, that is the angle opposite of FR. Pansinan nyo, no side C, daytoy left side the equation, dapat the angle nga i-consider mo, the opposite na. So, no the C kat ni FR, anya nga angle the opposite ni FR. If my side C is FR, what is the opposite angle of FR? Ay, 115. So, direct substitution tayo lang. At na maalak ni FR, that is equal to 100 squared plus 150 squared minus 2 times 100 times 150 times cosine 115. Naalayo? 212.6 pounds. Okay. So, naalak GFR. That is not yet my final answer. Kasi nabasaan tayo ng problem ko na determine the magnitude. So, the magnitude is 212.6 pounds. And the direction. Nukunan tayo ulit na direction, it pertains to the angle of inclination. So, the angle of inclination na rito, di ipagbaga na dating na angle of inclination. At ano, subligan tayo dating nga problem. Di ba, naala tayo yung FR. The angle of inclination na, from the x-axis, adinggana ikon ni FR, this is your angle of inclination. Ita the angle of inclination. And nakikitaan ni dita diagram. Di ba, the angle of inclination, that is equal to numan daytoy nga theta plus the 15 degrees. Nangalaak the 15 degrees. It is given in the problem. To further understand that, this is the diagram. Daytoy the answer. Kasano nga naala daytoy nga answer? Sabi, saan tayo? Kas connected tayo. The angle of inclination, so the direction nga ibagbaga na daytoy nga problem. That is the angle from the x-axis, daytoy the x-axis tayo, adinggana kani FR. And in this diagram, the J nga angle is named as phi. So, dayjay phi. And masolve tayo daytoy phi, basta amo tayo ni theta. Masolve tayo ni theta by using the sine law. And this is, ladies and gentlemen, this is the sine law. Malagip yung sine law? Or first time yung ma-encounter ti sine law or nalipatan yung ti sine law? Malagip yung sine law? Malagip yun daytoy? Or nalipatan nyo, di ko na nga. Okay, malagip dapat na lang. No malipatan, sukliyam. Di ba di ko na nag-sine law? Side A is equal to sine ni angle A. Malagip mo, dahil nga imus usar mo di high school ka. That is equal to side B, divide it by sine B. That is equal to side C over sine of angle C. Diba? Di side C nga FR, the opposite na dito 115. Diba? Dito nga 212.6. Dita ni FR. Tama? Dita ni FR. The opposite nga angle ni FR ni 115. Iso di ay. Tata, dito'y side B. ni 150 newtons, iti opposite angle na apo. Makita yun eh? Daytoy nga angle theta. Dayta di opposite angle na. Awan ti value na kasi iso ti birukan tayo eh. Gets? So di B iso ni 150, di opposite angle na iso ni theta. Daytoy angle phi nga daytoy, it is from the x-axis aging gana kani FR. Daytoy theta nga daytoy, ti measurement na apo dayta manipud dito ayan ti 100 newtons aging gana kani FR. Daytoy nga angle, dayta ti theta. Daytoy nga angle iso di opposite ni 150 newtons. So, iti calculator no input ko di daytoy 150 multiplied by sine of 115, divide it by 212.6. Again, take the inverse sine. That is equal to 39.8 degrees. Dayta 39.8 degrees. Dayta di angle nga daytoy. Di opposite ni B. Dayta di 39.8. Ti ibirbirukan tayo kaskuna. Ibirbirukan tayo dito nga problem. Haan nga ni theta. No dikat, itibirbirukan tayo daytoy phi. Daytoy nga angle tibirbirukan tayo. So how can we solve that one? Now looking at that diagram, the angle phi or the direction of FR is equal to 39.8 degrees plus 15 degrees, and that is equal to 54.8 degrees. This is the final answer. Ita tibirbirukan na rin yung problem. So to answer this question, determine the magnitude and the direction of the resultant force. The magnitude is equal to 212.6 pounds and the direction is 54.8 degrees from the horizontal or from the x-axis. No kunak nga from the horizontal, it means it is from the x-axis. No kunak nga from the vertical, it means it is from the y-axis. Okay? At tayo nga maulaw iti
For the moment of a force, consider a force of magnitude F and point P. Let's review the section perpendicular to the plane containing the force vector and the moment. No, kunan tayo gamin nga moment of a force. For example, dito diagram mo dito. This is a wrench. Itong diagram C. that wrench, di ba, let's say, no kayat mo anya nga ilusen DJ tornilyo na nga dito eh. No kayat mo ilusen iso na, di ba, dito yan handle na nga dito eh. You apply force, tapno ag-turn. Di turning na nga diya, we call that a moment. Nagets tayo? So, di pa nang apply mo ti force, then nag-turn, in turn mo, handle, we call that a turning moment or the moment mismo, and we have an equation for that. That is equal to M equal to F times D. Wherein D nga daytoy, that is the perpendicular distance from point P hanggang doon sa main line of action ng force. What do we mean by that? So, no dejayan ti nangikabilan tayo tornilyo, we call that point P. Tapos, the application ti force mo, the line of application, this is the line of application, the force. The distance na, perpendicular distance from point P hanggang doon sa may line of action ng force. That is D, or in other books, we call this your so for in for in other references, we call this your moment arm. Nukunan tayo nga moment arm, that is the perpendicular distance from the location, from point B hanggang doon sa may line of action ng force. So, pasat equation tayo to determine the moment of a force. F times D. So, always take note pag sinabing D, that is the moment arm. Let's have an illustration problem for this moment of a force. So, for this problem, what is the moment of the 40 kilonewtons about point A? So, the 40 kilonewtons, the direction of that force is to the right, upwards. So, no data kung kuna tayo nga line of action for the force, data di line na. Along that line, nandyan si 40 kilonewtons. Now, what is the moment of this 40 kilonewtons from point A? Yati moment na dijay. No, i-drawing tayo di line of action, the force, kan di point A, sa picture na. So, in the direction 1 tayo di line of action. Then, as you can see there in the diagram, this distance D, that is the perpendicular distance from point A hanggang ayanti line of action ni 40 kilonewtons. Then, from that, di ba, equation tayo garud the moment ngayon force times distance D. Tama? So, we need to determine the F, ay the D. Kasi given mo ito ni F, our F here is 40 kilonewtons. So, kailan lang na D. The answer here is 3 meters. Tapos, ano nga naala di 3 meters? Now, no, kikitan tayo dito nga diagram. Adda dito iti right triangle. Dito di right triangle. So, no right triangle data, mabalin tayong usaran dagi ko trigonometric functions ni nga naadal tayo idi trigonometry tayo nga subject, since right triangle dayto kat iti birbiro ka nga distance dayto D. Diba, from vertical angles, if this is 30 degrees, this is also equal to 30 degrees. So from that, I can use the trigonometric function sine. Di ba ko na nag-design? Sine of any angle is equal to opposite over hypotenuse. Tama. Dito diagram, kitak di theta iso ni 30 degrees. Anya di side na opposite ni 30, di ba iso di D. Anya ti hypotenuse na dahil nga triangle. Apay nga ni 60 hypotenuse na. Nasanay kayo lang ngay gaming nga ti triangle tayo ngay kasta. Sanay tayo, di ba nga kasta ti triangle tayo. Always dahil na hypotenuse. So dito kumbaga is baliktado ng iso na, paturugam lang ngay pagbali ng iso na kasti, tapos kayo nga maulaw. Dito J30 degrees, dito nga angle. Dito nga angle, data ni 30 degrees. Now, di ba no usarong iti sine of 30 degrees, dito di D, dito hypotenuse, data di 6. Nagbaliw lang di orientation lang, magpadamod lang di ay. Okay? So, no, di 30 degrees, the opposite side na kat ni D, iti hypotenuse ko kat ni 6. Masolve ko the value ni D. That is simply equal to 6 times sine of 30 degrees, that is equal to 3. So, the distance from point A hanggang the line of action ni 40 kilonewtons is equal to 3 meters. Okay. So, no nasolve ko garo din di value ni D. Masolve ko di moment. Nya di moment. Diba, moment is equal to F times D. And our F here is equal to 40 kilonewtons. And the distance tayo is 3 meters. So, 40 times 3 is 120. Now, take note of your moment, of your unit. The unit tayo, kilonewton meter. Awan tag cancel nga unit, di ba? Isong ano kunam nga moment, that is force times distance. So, dapat iti unit mo, no English, either kilonewton meter or newton meter. Usually, kasi iti units tayo for moments. Now, anya da ito eh. Kapag ada data nga sign. Yung kitam data nga sign, it is read as counterclockwise. Apay nga counterclockwise. No data DJ, agsubli tayo dito nga diagram. No data DJ line of action, di 40 kilonewtons. Diba, the nearest nga direction nga ag-turn iso na counterclockwise. Makikita dak ba? Kasi hangkong maika dito screen. Makikita dak kanya. J40 kilo, let's say, dito yung point A. Dito yung point A. Tapos, dito yung force. Diba, the nearest possible nga the force at turn to ni point A is towards counterclockwise. Di pa nag-turn na. Kasi no, nag-atid dugmot kan ti i-travel na no, dito 40 kilonewtons kat agpakas jepay lang. Di ba, nagadayumot, nagpas jepay lang, tapno lang matamaam dito eh. The nearest possible nga direction nga mapanam is pakas ti, tapno matamaam. Tama. Iso nga, it is very important to know the direction of your movement. Ulitak DJ, ikas tayo nga mangala iti direction ti movement as much as possible the nearest nga direction tapno matamaan na di nga point. Right? And ito'y diagram nga dito the nearest possible direction di 40 kilonewtons is counterclockwise. Kasi no apampay lang dito clockwise nagatidugmutan nga travel na tapno lang matamaan na ni point A. Kasi jelat nanti panunutan nyo tapno maalayo di direction iti movement. Again, it is very important when we talk about moments. It is very important to indicate also the direction of your moment. Okay? Are we clear on that? Madikot. As to the direction of your moment. Ay, sige. Direction of moments. Baliwak di orientation na tapno magets tayo. Let's say dito di point A. Dito ni point A niya. Tapos the line of action dito nga line adatoy ni say adatoy di force mo. Dito di force nga 40 kilonewtons. Ita di 40 kilonewtons. Diba, dito di tamtamaam nga point. Kayat mo nga tamaan, dito nga point. The distance from point A hanggang dito ayan linya di 40 kilonewtons iso di 3 meters. Now, kas anong nga maamuan no counterclockwise ba or clockwise? Diba, no kunan tayo nga counterclockwise, to the left, no clockwise to the right. Tama. Dito 40 kilonewtons tapno matamaam ni 80, the nearest possible nga direction mo, agpakastoy ka. So, tapno matamaam nga dagos ni A. Kasi no agpakastoy ka pa ilang, tapno matamaam ni A, nagatidtog. So, nga possible di jay. pinaka malapit na direction tapno matamaan ni point A is counterclockwise. Ulit no gamin ag clockwise ka, no ti direction mo ngay pakastoy, nagatidog di i-travel mo. No apay nga dito pay lang ti surutom di kulay red no adamot ti paspasik nga distance kumbaga nga pag-turnam iso dito kulay blue nga araw. So in this case tapno matamaam nga dagos ni point A di kaasigtigan or the easiest way for you to touch point A is turning clockwise ay counterclockwise. Medyo nagets tayo di pa nang ala iti direction iti moment. Dukunan tayo nga moment no moment either clockwise or counterclockwise lang ti direction mo. Ngam no force dato mabalin nga ti force mo nga ikat right, left, up or down. Ngam no moment clockwise or counterclockwise lang. Okay? So that is moment of force. So for this problem, there are four forces acting on the machine part. What is the sum of the moments of the forces about the origin O? So dito diagram, tas makita yun. There are four forces. We have 4 kilonewtons, 2 kilonewtons, 5 kilonewtons, and 3 kilonewtons. Now, di damdamagan na dito mano ti sum j no ag moment ni 3 kilonewtons ij point O, i-plus ko j moment ni 2 kilonewtons kani point O, plus j moment ni 4 kilonewtons kani point O, kan j moment ni 5 kilonewtons kani point O. Pag adak amin di nga moments, iso j birbiro kan na dito nga problem. So, no kitaan tayo ti diagram, i-redraw iso na. I-redraw sa titsura na. Ni 3 kilonewtons adda kan ni point O. The distance ni 2 kilonewtons kan ni point O is 300 millimeters. The distance of 5 kilonewtons hanggang kay point O, nagkataon na si 5 kilonewtons linya na touch na ni point O. Right? Kasi makita yung diagram. Then since the 4 kilonewtons kasi is naka-incline, hindi ko nakatay, no DJ force naka-incline, automatic na adda iti Fx and Fy na. Okay? So dito iti figure na dito nga makikita yun. This is the Fx of 4 kilonewtons and this is the Fy of 4 kilonewtons. Huling taka, no makakita kayo iti force nga naka-incline, automatic na adda iti Fx and Fy na diay. Yung components na. So, dito 4 cosine 30, that is the Fx of 4 kilonewtons. This is the Fy of 4 kilonewtons. Then, kailangan tayo di moments na nagiting forces. And here is the solution. Isagay saan tayo. Apay nga kasi tinagpaling yung solution ko. Let's start with the moment for 3 kilonewton force. Dito yung 3 kilonewtons. Nagkataon na yung 3 kilonewtons adda iso na kanipon O. So, let's say lagi that's kastilatan karikatan. No DJ force nagkataon na adda iso na ije point na kayat mo nga ag moment iso na for this case at pagpagaji problem dapat di force ag moment iso na kundi point O. So O di reference tayo. No ije nagkataon gamin dito nga dito problem tayo. J 3 kilonewtons, adda iso na ko ni point O. So, mukas J iti case tayo, the J moment is 0. Okay? Nagets tayo? Naawatan tayo di ay? No, the J force, nagkataon nga adda iso na mismo i-J point nga kayat nga reference mo, J moment is equal to 0. So, walang moment si 3 kilonewtons, ni 5 kilonewtons. Another case. Nagkataon na yung line kung nasaan si 5 kilonewtons tumama doon dito sa may point O. Ulitak, nagkataon na yung 5 kilonewtons, yung line, tumama siya kay point O. If that is the case, your moment is equal to 0. So, in this case, walang moment kay 5 kilonewtons. Naawatan tayo, dito'y moment for 3 kilonewton force, kadi moment of the 5 kilonewton force. Ngedi, suliak dabdama di question na. Pantayo dyan, 2 kilonewton force. Now, for the 2 kilonewton force, the value ETD, or the perpendicular distance, from the line of action ni 2 kilonewtons hanggang kay point O is 300 millimeters. Let's convert 300 millimeters into meters. 300 millimeters is equal to 0.3 meters. So, 0.3 times 2 kilonewtons, the moment garod ni 2 kilonewtons is equal to 0.6. Again, take note of the unit, kilonewton meter. Okay? Nagets tayo, no kasanok nga naala the moment ni 2 kilonewton force. Nagets tayo di Jai. Okay. Lastly, kailangan the moment ni 4 kilonewtons, and from this diagram, as you can see there, at dati duwa nga components tayo ni 4 kilonewtons, ni Fx kani Fy.
The moment of the 4 kilonewton force, let isolve tayo pa lang J kwa. DJ and T Fx. Dito ni Fx. Tapos dito ni Fy. Fx din ni Fy. Gfx, giba ti direction na is to the right. So, G force tayo, dito G force, 4 times cosine of 30 degrees. G moment arm na, or the distance ni 4 cosine 30 degrees, aging gana kan ni point O, iso dito 300 mm, I converted that to meters, so that is 0.3. Apay nga positive, apay nga clockwise. No, dito J4, Jfx, the easiest, or the direction po tap na matamaan na nga dagos ni point O is clockwise. At idug-unay ti i-travel na no counterclockwise pa lang isin. Okay? Same true with this one, the Fy. Again, Fy tayo is pointing upwards. And the distance na, dito nga Fy, from point O is 0.7 meters, or that is 700 millimeters, as seen here in the diagram. Counterclockwise iso na, from this arrow, at pa-clockwise, tap na matamaan na nga dagos ni point O. Again, this force sine 30, this is your force. And 0.7, that is the distance. Take note of your sign conventions. Tapno maala tayo this sum as we go on with our discussion. So, 0.7 times 4 sine of 30 degrees is equal to 1.4 kilonewton meter. Take note, G unit tayo. G unit mo usaran tayo niya. Again, this one, sorry, my mistake. This should be kilonewton meter. Okay? This is not yet the final answer. Kasi ibagbaga di problem is the sum. So, we need to take the sum of all the forces. Okay. Diba, na-solve tayo tatay. Ni 3 kilonewton force, awan ti moment na, iso nga 0. Ni 5 kilonewton force, wala rin siyang moment. Ni 2 kilonewton force, ada ti 0.6. Again, this is positive kasi clockwise. Tapos, the x component ni 4 kilonewtons, 1.039 kilonewton meter. Ni y component, that is negative 1.4 kilonewton meter. So, pag-a-addin tayo lang di dyan. Well, pag-a-addin tayo lang, tapos maala tayo di sum 80 moments. So, 0 plus 0 plus 0.6 plus 1.039 minus 1.4, and that is equal to, wait lang, 0.6 plus 1.039 minus 1.4. Okay lang. That is equal to 0.239 kilonewton meter. And this is now the final answer. The sum of the moments of all the forces in this problem is equal to 0.239 kilonewton meter. And since the remaining answer is positive, therefore automatic this is clockwise.